Hi Reddit. Throwaway account, because my soon-to-be ex and his office goblin still stalk my main. Let's call me Maya, 35F. My husband, well, ex-husband, can be Ethan, 37M. We'd been married 10 years. Together for 15. I used to think we were one of those solid couples, the kind who finish each other's sentences, laugh at dumb inside jokes, and still sneak kisses in the kitchen. Turns out, I was starring in a one-woman comedy show called The Joke's on You. Ethan works as a regional sales director for a software company. I work in event management, which means I travel a lot, week-long conferences, hotel ballrooms, too much coffee, too little sleep. Ethan always said he missed me when I was gone. Can't sleep without you, he'd text. Cute, right? So, imagine my surprise when I found out what he was actually doing when I was away helping coordinate an international tech expo in Dallas. My trip was supposed to run from Monday to Friday. But the conference wrapped early, one of the key sponsors canceled their big session, and I managed to reschedule everything ahead of time. I was exhausted but happy. I missed home, missed my bed, and missed Ethan. I thought I'd surprise him. I didn't tell him I was coming home early. That was mistake number one, though in hindsight, it was the best mistake I've ever made. I got an earlier flight Thursday morning and landed around 9 a.m. I stopped for his favorite breakfast, blueberry muffins from the cafe down the street, and picked up a little bottle of whiskey he'd been talking about trying. I was feeling romantic, thinking about how we could spend the day together before I had to dive back into work the next week. The drive home was weirdly peaceful. It had rained that morning, and everything smelled clean, fresh, new. I had no idea I was about to watch my marriage go up in flames. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Ethan's car was already there. Weird, because he was supposed to be at work. I figured maybe he'd taken the day off. I remember thinking, oh wow, maybe he's planning to surprise me too. The front door was locked, but I still had my key. I stepped inside, quiet like I was sneaking into my own house. The air smelled off. Like perfume. Not mine. And then I heard it. The faint sound of laughter, female laughter, from upstairs. My stomach dropped. Still, I was in denial. Maybe it was the TV? Maybe his sister stopped by? I crept up the stairs, muffin bag in one hand, whiskey bottle in the other, like some deranged breakfast fairy. And then I heard him. God, you're so much better than her. That sentence will live rent-free in my skull for the rest of my life. I don't even remember deciding to open the bedroom door. One second, I was standing there, frozen, and the next, I was pushing it open like I was possessed. There they were. Ethan. And Chloe. His secretary. In our bed. The one I paid for. The one we picked out together after spending 2 weeks arguing about mattress firmness. She was on top of him, hair a mess, that smug little smirk disappearing as soon as she saw me. Ethan's face went pale. He jumped up, nearly tripping over himself, stammering something like, Maya, it's not what it looks like. Yeah, sure. Because clearly, she just tripped and fell into your marital vows, right? I don't think I screamed. I didn't throw things. I didn't even cry. I just felt empty. Like someone had scooped my insides out with a cold spoon. I set the muffins on the dresser, placed the whiskey next to them, and said, happy early surprise. Then I turned around and walked out. He followed me down the stairs, but naked, begging me to wait and talk. I remember laughing. Actually laughing. It was this sharp, bitter sound I didn't even recognize. I grabbed my suitcase, which I hadn't even unpacked yet, and said, you two have fun. Don't forget to wash the sheets. I checked into a hotel that night. Called my best friend, Lena, who showed up 20 minutes later with takeout and tequila. I didn't cry until 2 a.m. The next morning, Ethan texted me about 50 times. It was a mistake. I don't even like her. Lonely. Right. So naturally, he decided to fix that by sleeping with someone who calls him boss. By Saturday, the story had spread. Chloe was single, but apparently had been bragging in the office for months about getting promoted in more ways than one. Her coworkers despised her, so they wasted no time telling HR exactly what was going on. Guess who suddenly found himself on leave pending investigation? Ethan. I wish I could say I felt satisfied, but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted him to lose everything, his job, his reputation, his comfort. I wanted him to feel the kind of hollow ache I felt that day. And I knew just how to make that happen. I got off the phone with HR and watched Ethan's face lose whatever color it had left. He thought losing his job was the worst I could do. He was wrong. We'd built our life on a quiet, ugly math. My salary paid for the house, my clients paid for vacations, my accounts carried the weight of our day-to-day. Everyone who knew us assumed Ethan was the man of the house because he wanted them to. The truth was simpler and more delicious. My name was on everything. My salary hit our accounts first. I'd signed the mortgage. I paid for the cars. I had the receipts, the statements, the login emails, all of it. I had leverage. When I decided to use it, I did it like a surgeon, precise, silent, and final. Saturday morning, he swaggered into the kitchen like nothing had burned down. He grabbed his wallet, slapped a debit card on the counter, and asked, too casually, if I wanted brunch. I set my coffee down. I'd already called that bank the night before. I listened to the customer service robot say, "For your protection, we've placed a temporary hold on that card," and smiled like a person with a plan. I'd also set up a new card in my name only, routed to a P.O. box I knew he wouldn't check. "Can you cover brunch?" he asked. "No," I said. "I can't cover your brunch." He blinked at me as if I'd said something rude. Why not?" "Because this one's on me," I said. I slid the bank's notification across the counter with my finger so he could see the official-looking text. "I'm closing any card with your name on it." I transferred the utilities and a chunk of money to a separate account. "You'll have to open one on your own." He laughed, a short bark, incredulous. "You're joking." I watched his false confidence drain. He fumbled for words, blame, bargaining, then tried to pull the "we need to talk" routine. I let him talk while I packed a small bag in the guest room. I left it on the hall table near the door, like an unresolved punctuation mark. He went to the garage to get his keys and came back white as paper. I'd had the locks replaced 2 days earlier. Something in his face, the way he looked at that new brass deadbolt, made me feel almost sorry. Almost. "I don't have to," he began. I cut him off with a look. "You left," I said. "I changed the locks so you wouldn't come and go like this without me knowing. You can get another set from the locksmith if you want to pay for it." He stood there, hand on the cold edge of the counter, bargaining with a breath that smelled of cologne and fear. "Maya, come on. Let's talk about this." "This is us talking," I said. "You don't get to sleep with my life and then walk into my kitchen like you didn't burn it down." Ethan was proud of his desktop setup, 3 monitors, a chair he said was worth more than our first sofa, a password manager he boasted about like it was a personality trait. He assumed that because he had an image of control at work, he'd be in control at home. He walked into our office to log into his email and found the screen locked with a message in bold, "Access revoked, contact account holder." The smart thermostat, the cameras, the ones he joked about directing like a traffic cop, even the shared family calendar, gone from his view. Where before he'd been the puppet master of our domestic little kingdom, now he couldn't even start the coffee machine without me. He swore. Loud, angry, petulant. He tried to smash the keyboard. I didn't stop him. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, calm as a winter pond, and watched him lose his balance. "You can't do that," he said finally, breathless. "I can," I said. "And I will." He thought his reputation would cushion the fall. He'd built a persona at community events, made small talk in service organizations, charmed our neighbors with barbecues and fake smiles. I began to erode that carefully painted facade with private conversations and clinical, unembellished facts. I sent emails not venomous, not threatening, but factual, to a few people whose opinions mattered to him. To the Homeowners Association, a brief note explaining that Ethan was no longer authorized to act on our behalf for any property matters, and that I, as the homeowner, requested all future correspondence be directed to me. To the contractor who'd been renovating the study, a clarification that payment requests needed to be sent to my business account. To a few mutual friends, private messages that were bare bones and impeccably civil. "I wanted to make sure you heard from me first. Ethan and I are separating. I will handle any household decisions from here on." I didn't smear him. I didn't dramatize. I let administrative facts do the dirty work of social erasure. People tend to side with the person who shows up with paperwork. It's practical, and they respect practicality. Ethan had always enjoyed the comforts of going home to a waiting plate, a functioning laundry machine, a house ready-made. On Monday morning, he walked into the kitchen in his slovenly way and discovered the pantry lockbox with groceries labeled personal use only. The house had food, yes, mine. He could eat if he called and apologized, if he accepted terms. He bristled and stalked through the rooms like a defeated king. You set terms, he spat. I set boundaries, I corrected. You set the terms for your behavior. You sold them by lying in our bed. I turned off the shared streaming services, removed him as a beneficiary on our travel insurance. I didn't tell him. He found out the hard way when he tried to book a last-minute flight and the corporate card declined, and changed the pins on the savings account we'd used for vacations. Each small denial was surgical, not humiliating in itself, but cumulatively devastating. At first, Ethan was theatrical, loud calls, dramatic pacing, the impulsive texts that slid into my inbox like a plea letter into a slot machine. He tried blaming stress, then asked for couples therapy, then offered money, as if anything could be bought back. When bargaining failed, he tried humiliation. He told coworkers that I'd gone off the deep end. He started showing up at neighborhood events with a polished, defensive smile. People looked uncomfortable, one or two whispered. But most of them simply mirrored the life they'd always seen, quiet, comfortable, unchanged. They helped themselves to my answers and took the facts I'd given them at face value. What he hadn't accounted for was the atmosphere of inevitability I had cultivated. People favored facts when they were tidy and presented by a person who looked composed. I kept my composure like a shield. I returned texts in measured sentences. I handed over only what was necessary and nothing more. The most satisfying moments were the small, private ones. The way he hovered by the sink, looking at the faucet but unable to start the dishwasher because the app required my authorization. The time he tried to access our joint streaming account and got the password changed prompt. The way he opened the mail, bills addressed to both of us, and watched the balance figures that he could no longer influence. There were times I almost felt petty. I considered changing the locks on the storage unit where he kept his guitars, or forwarding his office mail to a P.O. box with a return to sender stamp, but I kept those impulses in check. My revenge was not about tripping him on the stairs. It was about removing the floor beneath him until he learned to stand on his own feet again. A week after I came home, Ethan packed a duffel with clothes and a toothbrush and went to stay with his sister. He kept telling me he'd be back in a few days, that we could fix this. I let him leave the way a surgeon lets a patient go home, with a prescription and an appointment. Only my prescription was clear. He needed to prove he was sober of deceit before he'd be allowed back into our life. As he closed the door behind him, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, cold, and perversely satisfied. I'd taught him that pillow talk promises were not currency in my house. I'd taught him that the messy little economy of lies would not protect him when the biggest earner decided they were done. When the door shut, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened a spreadsheet. There are things you can pound with rage and things you have to cut with precision. I was done with rage. I had spreadsheets to balance, names to notify, and a slow, inexorable plan to make sure everything he broke would be paid for in full, by him, not by me. He didn't accept being cut off. He refused to be edited out like a bad scene. He escalated. And the escalation was messy, desperate, and ultimately his undoing. I knew he'd lash out. I did not know exactly how ugly it would get. It started with texts hundreds, then thousands. He texted at all hours, alternating between fury and pleading. I saved them like receipts. They were small, incriminating things I'd use later. Here are a few of the threads verbatim. I've redacted names for clarity. June 12th, 10:02 a.m. Ethan. Where are you? Pick up. June 12th, 3:18 p.m. Ethan. I want to talk. In person. Now. He sent pictures of the front door. Close-ups of the new deadbolt. A photo of his hand on the knob with a caption, "This isn't over." He tried charm, gifs, pleading emoji, late-night voice messages of him stammering, promising change. He tried blame, long paragraphs about loneliness and stress and how I never listened. He tried bargaining, offers of money, of couples therapy, of leaving Chloe. He tried threats, thinly veiled comments about making my life difficult if I refused to play nice. The messages blurred into a tide. I stopped replying. I let them pile up like evidence. The first time he actually came to the house after I'd changed the locks, I was hosting a small client call in the study, headphones on, voice muted, calendar open. I heard the crunch of gravel, then the knock. 1, 2, 3 sharp raps at the front door. I muted myself, stood up, and looked at the window. Ethan was there, face pale, hair mussed, holding a bouquet of supermarket roses like a pretense. He waved when he saw me. He thought he could charm his way through the new reality. He did not. He banged on the door, louder, paced, and then left after 5 minutes. I watched him through the camera I hadn't told him I reactivated. He sulked to his car and drove away. That night, his messages intensified accusations that I was infantilizing him, screenshots of the security camera I'd paid for years before, his face on loop, and a text that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Ethan, you changed the locks. Fine. But do you really think that will stop me? I forwarded that to the local police non-emergency line and the local station's online tip form. I included the screenshot. I also filed for a log, small, sensible steps that built a paper trail. He started showing up at odd hours. Once at 6:30 a.m. in a raincoat, dripping and grumpy, when the gardener was there. He froze when he saw the neighbor, Mrs. Kravitz from 11B, opening her peephole with a cup of tea. She gave him the sort of look that ends relationships. On another occasion, he sat in his car across the street for 2 hours, idling, watching our house while I did a grocery run. I drove past him on purpose, waved, and kept driving. When I turned on the street back toward home, his car was gone. He left notes stuck to the windshield of my car, narrow, accusatory, obsessive little scraps. We can fix this. Think about what you're doing. You'll lose everything. I photographed each one and saved it. One night he showed up after midnight and banged on the back door so hard the entire house woke up. Our neighbor called 911. The police came, lights slicing the dark, and he was there, breathing hard, sloppy-eyed, trying to explain that he was just trying to get in to talk. They asked him to leave. He didn't have a key. He didn't have permission. He paced and argued and began to raise his voice. The officers were calm, professional. One asked him for ID, another asked for his side of the story. He complained about being locked out, about being persecuted, about how I was turning our marriage into a spectacle. They took his statement, and then they politely told him to leave. He refused. He said he would wait on the porch. That's when things tipped. One officer asked him to step away from the door. Ethan stepped toward the officer and reached, apparently, for his collar in a movement that looked like aggression. The officer interpreted it as a potential assault risk. He was handcuffed on the lawn in front of our house and read his rights. Mrs. Kravitz took a photo. I did not speak to him. I watched from the window with a steady, hollow calm. Handcuffed, he kept saying, "It's my house too." He said it like it explained everything. The officers escorted him to their cruiser. He begged through the glass to speak to me. I stayed inside. I took screenshots, forwarded them to my attorney, and to the local prosecutor's office tips email. The police ticketed him for trespassing and put a warning on file. I filed for a temporary restraining order that night. After the arrest, his messages shifted again. They went from pleading to venomous. June 20th, 1:42 a.m. Ethan, you called the cops on me? Classy. He started to show up where I worked. Once he tried to enter the lobby of a venue while I was meeting with a client. Security intercepted him and escorted him off the premises. He couldn't help himself. He wanted control back. He wanted me to respond. One evening, he left a voicemail on my work line that I played through twice. His voice was low and tight. Ethan, voicemail Maya. Listen, this isn't how it ends. If you want to play the martyr, go ahead. But understand this, people don't like being cut out of their own lives. People do things when they're pushed. I saved the voicemail and sent a copy to my lawyer. The cops were compassionate but clear. they couldn't arrest someone just for showing up, unless there was a clear violation. But with the trespass ticket, the logs, the camera footage, the notes, and the growing list of incidents, there was a pattern. The officer who took the midnight response told me, "You did the right thing documenting everything. The next time he crosses a line, we'll have more to work with." Which is precisely what I wanted. I wasn't naive. I wanted escalation to be on his head, on record, and undeniable. I filed the temporary restraining order that night. The judge signed it the next morning on an ex parte basis, a protective order given the evidence. It forbade him from coming within 100 yards of the house, calling, texting, emailing, or contacting me through third parties. I printed the signed order, framed it, and left it on the kitchen table where he'd see it if he came back. I did not leave the house. When the officer handed Ethan a copy after a new complaint, this time for loitering in front of the house, his face crumpled. For all his bluster, the law had weight. He had not anticipated the consequences of escalation. He thought being loud would make me soft. He was wrong. The restraining order made him quieter, but not docile. He texted from burner phones. He asked mutual friends to pass along messages. He tried to manipulate neighborhood gossip. Each attempt was a new entry in my file. Every screenshot, every forwarded message, every eyewitness statement tightened the net. One late afternoon, he attempted to climb the back fence to retrieve a guitar he claimed he had left behind. A neighbor saw him, called me, and then called 911 when he didn't leave. He was arrested again, this time for violation of the temporary restraining order, and spent a short night in the cell. The charges were processed. He was released with conditions, court dates, mandated no contact, and a criminal file that would not be erased by charm. I didn't dance on his downfall. I documented it. I let the system do its work. I was precise, not petty. I had set the stage. His choices, his behavior, his repeated crossings were all on official record. I wasn't done with him. Cold-blooded revenge is patient and meticulous. I had already flipped the script from secret affairs to statutory evidence. As he sat in the back of that cruiser for the second time, hands cuffed, he looked at me through the window. There was no performance left in his face, only a stunned, raw realization that his behavior had consequences. That look would be useful later, in court, to juries, to the bank, to anyone who still thought his life was untouchable. I opened my laptop, added a new tab to the spreadsheet, and labeled a column, Legal, Timeline, and Evidence. I began to enter dates. Because revenge without documentation is just revenge. Cold-blooded revenge is methodical, and it leaves a paper trail that cannot be argued away. He thought his last arrest would be a blip. He thought the world would still believe the version of him he'd carefully curated, the smooth talker, the affable neighbor, the dedicated son. He was very bad at reading facts. He assumed that charm could outrun documentation. He was wrong. HR finally completed its investigation into the affair and the office rumors. Ethan's boss called him into a meeting that looked like a stage set for termination. I didn't gloat. Professionally, I let the company do their thing, but I also didn't stop what followed. I supplied HR with evidence. The screenshots of messages he had sent my phone while he was in the office, the proof that Chloe had been meeting him at unusual hours at the regional office, the declarations from 2 coworkers who'd witnessed inappropriate flirtations and who, once the company assured confidentiality, spoke up. I had been meticulous. These people were already tired of the rumor mill. They wanted facts. The call came on a rainy Tuesday. He left the building with a cardboard box and a face like someone who'd just realized his vacation home had been sold out from under him. 3 days later, his LinkedIn changed from regional sales director to seeking opportunities. His phone stopped lighting up with client messages. The deals he'd been shepherding slid into limbo. The company sent an internal memo severing ties with the contractor responsible for Chloe's placement, a smart HR move, and informing the team that personnel changes had been made in response to conduct inconsistent with company values. The euphemism was loud enough. He posted a short, tightly worded update on social media about personal matters and moving forward. It read like a press release for a canceled show. Clients reached out privately, then politely disengaged. A few vendors called the company to confirm when they'd be paid. A few more quietly rescinded invitations and speaking engagements. Ethan called me that day, angry, shrill, pleading. He wanted me to stop. He said he couldn't afford the optics, that his career was all he had left. I listened. I did not apologize. I told him the truth. You made your decisions. You can't wriggle them back into tidy apologies. When something like this happens, people want a story they can live with. Ethan chose to tell his story quickly, before mine could be heard. He called his mother, his sister, his father, and spun them a version of events where he was the wounded party, a man locked out of his own home by a vengeful spouse who'd gone off the rails. He painted me as irrational, unstable, perhaps even cruel. He was practiced at performance. Families want to believe their children. So I did the nuclear thing. I gave them the evidence. Not to humiliate them, I told myself. To protect myself. To make sure the people who mattered most to him knew the truth before he could manipulate it further. I drafted an email that took me 20 minutes to compose and 30 seconds to send. It was a cold, factual thread, no flourish, no venom. I attached a folder, a PDF of the temporary restraining order, time-stamped screenshots of his midnight porch pounding, the screen caps of messages where he admitted guilt and begged for forgiveness, the police reports. The security camera stills of him on the front path at 12:13 a.m., the HR statements trimmed to remove identifying coworkers, but preserving the narrative arc, and lastly, a short note in my own voice addressed to them. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, and family. I know you have heard Ethan's version. I want you to see mine. Attached is a timeline and evidence. I am sharing this because I expect honesty from the people in my life and because I want to give you the full context in case Ethan asks for your support. I hope you will read it and, if you wish, reach out with questions. Sincerely, Maya. I BCC'd a small list. His parents, his sister, 3 cousins who'd been close growing up, people who'd once called him Honest Eli at Thanksgiving. I hit send. Group chats are a modern oracle. Within minutes, his mother replied. Mrs. Caldwell, Maya, I don't know what to say. I love my son. He called me in tears this morning and said you locked him out. Is this really true? I could have replied with a defense. I could have excused my methods. Instead, I forwarded one of the screenshots, his message at 3:18 a.m., where he begged and admitted, I slept with her. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Maya, it's true. I didn't want you to hear a one-sided story. The thread expanded. His sister wrote that she didn't believe he would do something so selfish. His father asked for a phone call. His mother sent a voice memo, cracked, fragile, asking for an explanation. We spoke. I answered the questions simply, precisely, like I was testifying. I showed them the security camera still where he stood on the front steps at midnight. I sent the police report number and the officer's name. I told them about Chloe, what she did, and what the office said. I included a screenshot where Ethan texted me a line that was, frankly, damning. You'll regret this if you keep me out of my own life. They sat in their kitchen, the family unit I'd only ever seen in holiday photos, and watched the files like a slideshow that refused to be pleasing. At first, there was denial. Then there was anger at him, at me, at the situation. His mother let out a long, involuntary sound that was more grief than fury. His sister shut down and didn't reply to anything for hours. His father asked questions. Why didn't we try counseling? Why didn't we? I answered as honestly as the facts allowed. Ethan called, furious, demanding that I stop contacting his family. He accused me of dragging his family into this. He said it would break them. He said I was cruel. His words were theatrical, designed to make the family the victims, and to make me the villain. I told him, plainly, you chose to make your life a story. You chose actions that created a path of evidence. When you presented your sanitized version to your family, I made sure they had the rest of the picture. If you want to mend things with them, you'll have to do it honestly. He hung up, breathing ragged and furious. Hours later, I received a message from his sister. It started with, I don't know what to think, and turned into, I always thought he was an honorable person. She asked for time. She asked questions I answered with dates and attachments. She apologized for not having called me sooner. That apology was a small, potent thing, an admission on their part that they'd been given only one side. His mother's messages were longer, laced with the tremor of someone who saw both sides at once and didn't know which to choose. She called both of us, first Ethan, then me. With Ethan, she spoke with the voice of a parent shielding a child. With me, she spoke like someone recalibrating expectations, asking for details, clarifying the timeline. The mother who once left casseroles on our porch now asked about orders of protection and whether I was safe. When families see evidence, especially clean, documented evidence, they tend to favor the person who presents facts without drama. They like clarity. They like the person who doesn't need to scream to be heard. I had given them clarity, and in doing so I severed the narrative Ethan had been stockpiling to his advantage. Within a week the family visits happened, awkward, quiet, bound by new rules. Ethan's father stopped inviting him to lunch. His sister accepted a request for lunch with me to hear more. His mother called and left a long message. I still love him, but I also think you were brave to send this. We need to talk. It wasn't an outright condemnation. It wasn't my victory lap. What it was a severing of the easy assumptions that had always cradled Ethan. He had to stand, for once, in the truth. No spin, no charm, no rehearsed lament would clean it. Reputation is a fragile currency. Ethan's had been based on one narrative: affable, hardworking, dependable. When the ledger was opened and the entries recorded, late-night texts, police reports, HR statements, that currency depreciated rapidly. He lost his job, his family's unquestioning support, and the social capital that had lubricated his life. People who'd once invited him to speak casually now avoided his calls. Clients who'd trusted him began to ask for refunds. His weekends, once filled with golf and backyard barbecues, contracted into quiet, thin hours spent on the couch, scrolling a phone that no longer buzzed with opportunity. I did not dance on his ruin. I documented it. I organized it. I let the evidence do the work of social death, because social death is far more effective if it happens without theatrics, if it is simply the natural consequence of a chain of choices. That night, after his parents stopped answering his frantic texts and after the group chat cooled, Ethan sat alone in a small apartment his sister had offered for a few nights and sent me one final message that was almost like a surrender. Ethan, please. Stop. I can't lose everything. Maya, you chose. He read it. He did not reply. I closed my laptop and added a new tab to my spreadsheet. The column read, Financial and Social Damage Control. I wasn't finished. Nuclear didn't mean immediate annihilation. It meant total, systematic dismantling of every cushion that had allowed his behavior to continue. Next up, public exposure, timed, tactical, legally defensible. The next dominoes were lined up, and they would fall in sequence. By the time the lawyers got involved, Ethan still thought there was a version of the truth that could save him. He hadn't yet learned that courts don't deal in versions, they deal in documents. I had documentation. He had excuses. My attorney, a woman named Candace who smiled like a guillotine, had been waiting for the moment we could strike. Now that he's violated the restraining order, she said, flipping through her notes, we move from defense to offense. He's unstable, he's been warned, and you have proof. We file for divorce on grounds of adultery and mental cruelty. You'll keep the house, the accounts, and anything purchased under your income. Everything was purchased under my income, I said. She smiled. Even better. We filed within 48 hours. The petition hit his inbox like a thunderclap. He tried to call, of course. I ignored it. Instead, I forwarded all communications through Candace. Every time he texted or called, she added another entry to the evidence folder: harassment, intimidation, contact attempts post-restraining order. Each one was another nail in the coffin he'd built himself. He arrived at court looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His hair was greasy, his tie crooked, his face puffy from stress. He still tried to charm the clerk. Old habits die hard. Candace and I sat quietly, stacks of paper between us, police reports, text transcripts, screenshots, video captures, bank statements showing every purchase he'd made on business trips. When the judge asked for our summary, Candace didn't even raise her voice. "Your Honor," she began, "my client has been stalked, harassed, and financially exploited by the defendant. We have extensive documentation. We are requesting a full property award, exclusive use of the marital home, and continuation of the restraining order." Ethan stood up, hands trembling. "That's not fair. She's taking everything. I just want to talk to her." The judge didn't even look up. "Mr. Caldwell, do not address your ex-wife directly in this courtroom. You've had ample opportunity to comply with the court's previous orders." Candace slid one page forward, a printed text thread from the night of his arrest. He'd written, "You'll regret this. I swear to God, I'll make sure you pay." The judge read it in silence. The courtroom air went still. "I'm extending the restraining order indefinitely," the judge said finally. "And I'm granting Mrs. Caldwell full control of all joint assets pending settlement." Ethan's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering frantically. Ethan just stared at me, a look that wasn't angry anymore. Just hollow. Like the moment the fire realizes it's out of oxygen. We never had children, but Ethan had a dog, our dog, technically. A golden retriever named Scout. He'd always used Scout as emotional leverage, insisting, "He's mine, you can't take him." So I went through the channels. Veterinary records? My name. Microchip registration? My name. License renewal? My name. Food, training, vet bills? All paid through my account. When my lawyer presented that list to the mediator, Ethan's face crumpled. "You're taking my dog?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm keeping my dog." Scout sat beside me at the hearing, tail thumping against the tile floor. He looked up at me, then at Ethan, and let out a low, uncertain whine. Ethan tried to call him over. Scout didn't move. I scratched behind his ear. "Good boy." The mediator cleared her throat. "It seems clear that Mrs. Caldwell is the primary caretaker." And that was that. Ethan lost the last living thing that trusted him. Once the court froze his access to joint funds, Ethan's financial structure collapsed. He'd built his lifestyle around my income, the mortgage, the cars, the credit lines, all under my name. He had no savings of his own because he never needed them. Now he did. Creditors started calling. He moved out of his sister's apartment into a rental on the edge of town, one of those short-term, furnished places that smell like stale carpet and microwave dinners. The neighbors there didn't know him. They didn't care about his sob story. He was just another tenant who paid late. I didn't need to ruin him financially. I just let the natural consequences do the job. His car was repossessed within 2 months. The executive watch collection he'd bragged about on social media? Sold. The mutual friends who once envied our perfect life? Ghosted him. Revenge didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be inevitable. 3 months after the divorce filing, our court case became public record, as all civil cases eventually do. Local business circles started whispering. People found the restraining order in the county database. The gossip spread faster than I could have orchestrated it. A few months earlier, Ethan had been nominated for a Leadership in Sales award at a regional conference. After the record hit the wire, the nomination vanished. His LinkedIn profile was scrubbed of accolades. He deleted his Twitter account. He became a digital ghost, not because I asked for it, but because no one wanted to associate with a man whose search results included restraining order and harassment complaint. One evening, I received a call from a journalist who covered corporate ethics scandals. She'd been tipped off about a former regional director with a harassment history. She asked if I'd be willing to go on record. "No," I said, calm and firm. "But the documents are public. You can read for yourself." She did. 2 weeks later, a short article appeared in the local business section. Former sales executive dismissed amid conduct investigation and legal proceedings. No names, just facts. Everyone who needed to know knew. Everyone else just forgot him. Months later, he sent one final message. This one came through a court-approved channel, filtered through his lawyer. It was brief, the kind of note a man writes when he's finally out of excuses. "Maya, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to say I understand now what I did. I hurt you. I hurt myself. You were right to walk away. I hope someday you can forget the worst parts. I didn't respond. I printed it, added it to the binder labeled post-divorce communications. Evidence of remorse, perhaps, but mostly proof of closure. I kept the house. Scout. My business. My sanity. Every room felt lighter. No ghosts, no lies, no anxiety humming beneath the floorboards. Sometimes at night, I'd sit in the living room with a glass of wine, scrolling through old photos. I didn't delete them. They were reminders, not of him, but of who I'd been before I decided to stop letting someone else write my story. Revenge didn't fix the betrayal. It didn't erase the pain. But it gave it structure order. It turned chaos into consequence. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger beyond documenting the truth. The world did the rest. 6 months later, I ran into one of Ethan's old coworkers at a conference. She looked uncomfortable at first, then relieved. I heard what happened, she said quietly. Good for you, Maya. He wasn't the person we thought he was. I smiled. He never was. He just finally ran out of people to lie to. She nodded. So what now? Now, I said, picking up my conference badge. Now I live. He wasn't finished. Not because he was clever, but because he was cornered, and corners make people dangerous. If part 5 was the slow demolition of his life, part 6 was the night he decided to torch the map. Ethan had one stupid, obvious strategy left. He would either destroy me outright or try to drag me with him. He chose both. For weeks after the court rulings, he stayed mostly silent. Legal counsel, a rented room, sporadic burner texts that my attorney ignored. Then the tone changed. The texts went from pleading to clinical threats. The emails came through a spoofed address pretending to be from one of my larger clients, filled with vague accusations of misconduct and calls for my contract to be terminated. Someone tried to open a fraudulent credit line in my name. A few of my vendors received calls from a man who sounded like Ethan, but used a different voice, threatening, insinuating, asking illegal-sounding questions. He had attempted to weaponize the world against me, to smear my business, to steal my finances, to manufacture a scandal that would make my life as ruinous as his felt. He thought it would be clever. He was not clever. The first fatal mistake he made was technical arrogance, a sloppy burner phone purchased under his sister's name, an email forwarded that contained metadata, a voicemail left from a number that could be traced. For a man used to performing, the mechanics of evasion were foreign. He did not bother with the kind of care his plan required. He was sloppy because he was panicked. The second mistake was human. He tried to recruit a former coworker, someone on the margins emotionally and financially, who recorded their entire conversation and later turned it over to my attorney rather than play ball. The recording contained the voice, the plan, the threats, and the acknowledgement. If she loses the company, she won't have anything. I'll make sure she pays. Spoken plainly on the record. Those two mistakes, the technical trace and the recorded recruitment, would be his undoing. It happened late on a Tuesday. I was at work, a ducking in, ducking out day of meetings, when my assistant, Sarah, texted, "Do you have a minute? Our billing portal just flagged a mass outgoing payment request." I took the call in my car. The company's finance person was calmly frantic. Someone had attempted to redirect a $250,000 payment to a third-party vendor that I had never heard of. My heart sank. The skillful, immediate response of my finance team froze the transfer. The bank had a hold. Fraud alerts triggered. We were safe, but shaken. Minutes later, another email pinged my phone. A client contact, copied to a list of industry execs, alleged that I had been unprofessional and had breached confidentiality on a past contract. The email looked legit at first glance. It was signed with the company logo and came from an address almost identical to my client's. The subject line was poisonous. Allegations, urgent review. I forwarded everything to Candace. She did what she always did. She gathered, cataloged, and neutralized. She contacted the bank with the fraud hold. She called the client to confirm the email's origin. She instructed IT to trace the headers. IT came back with something small but fatal. The originating IP route traced to a small cluster of rental units near where Ethan had been staying 2 nights prior. The phone number used to submit the forged paperwork matched a trace that intersected with the burner phone his sister had purchased for him. The recorded conversation from the ex-coworker added context. Ethan wanted to burn her down so he could start again. When the detective called to tell me they had enough for probable cause, the voice on the line was sharp with professional satisfaction. "We'll need to pick him up," she said. "There's an arrest warrant pending for fraud, attempted extortion, and identity theft. They found him at a cheap motel on the edge of town, a duffel bag next to him, receipts splayed like a nervous confession." He didn't resist. He was quiet, vacant, like a person who had finally accepted being seen through. When the detective read him his rights, his mouth moved, but no performance came. He asked about my safety, an odd, stilted attempt at concern, and then he asked for his phone back, for lawyers, for anything that might turn the tide. The detectives collected the devices, the receipts, the motel key, and one precarious little list of names that connected him to his attempt to manufacture chaos. The list went into evidence. The devices went into a lab. The recordings went into the file. The district attorney's office moved quickly. This wasn't an argument about feelings anymore, it was criminal. The evidence stack was clean. The attempted fraudulent transactions, blocked and traced, the spoofed emails with headers pointing back to Ethan's IP hops, the voicemail left for my vendors, the recorded recruitment call where he outlined the plan and promised retaliation. At arraignment, the charges were read. Ethan's face finally showed real fear. Not the performative fear that once got him sympathy. This was the pure animal panic of a man who had miscalculated the law's appetite for retribution. Attempted extortion, the prosecutor said, each syllable deliberate. Identity theft. Fraudulent use of banking credentials. Conspiracy to commit financial fraud. He was remanded on a no-bail hold due to flight risk. They had uncovered a half-paid flight ticket in his duffel bag to a country he'd once rhapsodized about as an escape. Candace sat beside me in the gallery, expression unreadable. "This is permanent," she said softly. "The pattern is clear." He chose to become criminal rather than accountable. The trial was ugly in a way that didn't feel theatrical. There were no dramatic revelations on the stand. There was only the slow, exact motion of evidence being lined up and labeled. The jury saw the emails, the bank holds, the recordings, the text threads showing his intent and escalation, the motel receipts, and the trace logs connecting his devices to the spoofed accounts. His defense tried to argue desperation, a mental state, that he hadn't understood the implications, but the jury had already seen the recorded recruitments and the deliberate steps he had taken, the burner phones, the coordination with a third party, the forged signatures. It all showed mindset. It all showed planning. One witness was particularly damaging, the former coworker who had recorded their conversation. She sat under oath, hands steady, and played the recorded clip for the court. Ethan listened in the dock like a man hearing himself be unmade. "If she loses everything, she won't stand in my way," he'd said on the recording. It was the last, clear sentence that undid him, because it revealed motive and malice. The jury took 3 days. They deliberated around coffee pots and sticky notes and returned with faces that were too tired to be performative. Guilty on all counts. The judge's sentences were not melodramatic, they were measured and long. The convictions carried a combined sentence that put Ethan in state prison for several years. The judge cited the premeditation, the violation of prior protective orders, and the emotional damage caused. "We are not in the business of moral vengeance," the judge said as he pronounced the sentence, voice stone. "We are in the business of protecting the public and upholding the law." Ethan's world, already stripped down to rent, canceled engagements, and family silence, shrank to a cell with a bunk and a sliver of window. The man who had once treated charm as currency now had only the slow reality of an institutional calendar. The permanence of it was the kind that lives in stamps on pages and recorded intake notes. I did not dance on the sentence. I filed victim impact statements, attended hearings, gave measured testimony, and then went back to the work of ordering my life. There were practicalities, securing accounts, testifying to the bank, notifying clients, and then the quieter work of reassembling sleep. People asked if I felt vindicated. The truth was complicated. I felt shielded, safe from his capacity to manipulate my life, and hollow, because a man I'd once loved and trusted was now confined by walls and schedule. There is an ethical complexity to seeing someone you once shared a bed with end up in prison. There is no simplistic pleasure in it. It was justice, certainly, in that it prevented future harm. It was also a final, irrevocable closure. Scout stayed with me. He was my tether to a life that still made sense, walks at sunrise, the warm weight of loyalty that didn't need explanation. Years later, when court records finally settle into the public archive and when the monthly routine of parole checks and restitution takes its long course, the story will be a line in an official ledger: convictions, dates, sentences. No romance, no mythology, just paperwork and stamps. I kept the binder labeled Post-Divorce Communications. In it were pages of texts, audio transcriptions, bank logs, and the final judgment. I never framed the sentence. I didn't need to. The fact that it existed and that the law had weighed his choices with evidence was, in its way, the last act of the revenge I had administered, cold, meticulous, and, ultimately, permanent. If someone asks why I went so far, I tell them back then the only language the world recognized for men like Ethan was consequence. He'd had every chance to choose differently. He chose malice. If you want to call it revenge, call it what you like. I call it survival. 2 years is enough time for a wound to scab over, but not enough for it to disappear. Enough time for the world to stop asking questions, for whispers to fade, for the silence to become comfortable again. Enough time to learn what peace actually sounds like. The house is quiet in the mornings now, sunlight through sheer curtains, coffee brewing, the low hum of the kettle. Scout is older. He moves slower, grayer around the muzzle, but he still follows me everywhere. He's the only creature who knows the whole story without judgment, every locked door, every long night, every paper I filed. Sometimes, I catch him staring out the window like he remembers too, the nights when there were knocks at the door and raised voices. He'll sigh, settle his head on his paws, and I'll whisper, "It's over." And it is. Work is steady. My company recovered. The clients who stayed were loyal, and the ones who left were easily replaced. I've learned to say no to things that drain me: projects, people, conversations. It's a small but profound luxury. The women I once envied, the ones who seemed perfectly put together, now confide in me. They ask how I did it, how I walked through the fire and didn't burn up. I tell them the truth. You don't walk through it. You crawl, you drag yourself, you survive by inches. But one day, you look up and you realize the smoke has cleared. Every 6 months, the parole office sends a notice, a form letter about Ethan's status, his sentence, his rehabilitation courses. I never open them right away. They sit in a drawer until I'm ready, and then I scan the page. He's still serving time. The court's restitution schedule runs until he's released. His handwriting appears once a year, a permitted letter, written with the self-pity of someone who still doesn't understand the full scope of his damage. I don't reply. I file them in the same binder as everything else. Not out of bitterness, out of record-keeping. Because documentation is what saved me before, and it feels like a kind of armor now. The binder is full. Heavy. Complete. I plan to burn it one day, but not yet. Last spring, I planted a garden where the old security lights used to shine harsh and white. Now there are roses, lavender, and one small olive tree. Every time I water it, I think about the irony that something so peaceful grows over the place where I once stood trembling, clutching a phone, waiting for police sirens. When neighbors pass, they wave. No one mentions the past anymore. To them, I'm just the woman with the golden retriever and the overflowing garden. I like that. Ordinary feels sacred. People talk about closure like it's a destination, a point on a map you arrive at and declare, "I'm done." But closure is quieter. It's not an ending, it's an absence. The day you realize that the fear, the anger, even the desire for revenge have all gone still. Not gone, just quiet. Sometimes I reread the first pages of my old journal, the one I started after I walked in on him. I see a woman who is shattered and shaking, but determined. She didn't know how strong she was yet. I want to tell her that the rage she felt would one day harden into boundaries, into wisdom, into calm. That revenge isn't destruction. It's a reclamation. Every evening, Scout and I walk the same route, past the post office, the park, and the edge of town where the lights start to dim. It's peaceful there, the kind of peace that doesn't ask you to forget, but lets you rest anyway. Sometimes, I pass people arguing on porches, couples on the edge of something breaking. And I whisper a prayer I don't even believe in anymore. May they learn before it's too late. Because I did. And that's the truest revenge of all. I got my life back. And I kept it.